The night mist spread like a veil over the small town of Whitby, in the north of England. It was a place anchored in time, where ancient traditions and superstitions mingled with the daily life of its inhabitants. During the day, Whitby was bustling with people everywhere. Fishermen returned with their catch, merchants hawked their wares, and children played in the cobblestone streets. But as the sun set and the mist enveloped the landscape, an eerie silence hung over the town. In the taverns, with candlelight flickering and fires crackling, the elders shared stories passed down from generation to generation. And there was one story in particular that everyone, young and old, knew, that of the Barghest. The Barghest was said to be a canine specter, much larger than any wolf, with fur as black as night and eyes that glowed with a red glare. It was not simply a monster lurking in the shadows, it was a harbinger of death. It was believed to haunt those who were near their last breath, and its howl, a high-pitched, plaintive sound, was a sign that someone in the village would pass into the other world before dawn. For the children, the Barghest had become something of a scare story. "Don't go too far away or the Barghest will get you," they would shout in their games. But for the older ones, those who had lived long enough to hear the Barghest howl more than once, they knew it wasn't just a tale. It was a warning, a call from beyond, a shadow that crept through the deserted streets of Whitby on the darkest of nights. Whitby seemed not to have changed at all since Isabel left. The narrow houses, with their tile roofs, seemed to be in cahoots with each other, whispering forgotten secrets. When Isabel arrived, she was greeted by the familiar scent of the sea breeze and the distant squawking of seagulls. Her Aunt Agatha's house was at the end of a dead-end street, surrounded by rose bushes and jasmine. Although it seemed to have stood the test of time, the weight of years was evident in its faded walls and creaking beams. The first night, as Isabel settled into her old room, a chilling howl cut through the stillness of the night. It was a melancholy, almost human sound that seemed to be born from the very heart of the darkness. Isabel peered out the window and for an instant thought she saw two glowing red eyes watching her from a distance. However, as she blinked, the vision disappeared. The next day, while strolling through the local market, she overheard locals whispering about a recent sighting of the Barghest. Elders and youngsters murmured, remembering those who had been visited by the beast before facing death. The fear in their voices was evident. In the evening, while dining with her Aunt Agatha, Isabel mentioned the howl she had heard. Her aunt, with a pale face and trembling hands, told her that she had heard it too. And not just that night, but several times in the previous weeks. The night was falling, and Aunt Agatha's mansion was plunged into a sepulchral silence. However, Isabel could not fall asleep. Her thoughts took her back to her childhood when the story of the Barghest was merely a fable to frighten disobedient children. That evening, determined to satisfy her curiosity and find some fresh air, Isabel decided to take a walk. The cobblestone streets reflected the faint glow of the street lamps, and the shadows of the buildings seemed to stretch to infinity. As she walked, a distant, melancholy howl cut through the air. Isabel stopped, feeling a shiver run down her spine. As she continued her walk, she began to notice a figure in the corner of her eye, a shadow that seemed to follow her. As he turned a corner onto a less well-lit street, he saw at the end of it the towering figure of a beast. It was a huge black dog, with a piercing gaze of ember-red eyes and a maw that glowed with a sinister hue. Terrified, but fascinated at the same time, Isabel froze. The Barghest approached slowly, each step echoing in the silence of the night. Though she expected a growl or an attack, the specter simply stopped in front of her, watching her. Just when Isabel thought the Barghest would pounce on her, a high-pitched caw broke the tension. A crow, perched on the nearby roof, caught the Barghest's attention, which, with a last glance at Isabel, disappeared into the darkness. Isabel, her heart pounding, ran back to the mansion. Upon entering, she found her Aunt Agatha sitting by the fireplace, a grave expression on her face. "You saw it, didn't you?" asked Agatha in a breathy whisper. Isabel nodded, still breathless. "Then it's time you knew the real story of the Barghest," Aunt Agatha said. Isabel, desperate to protect her aunt from the beast, sought the help of a village elder known for her knowledge of old lore and rituals. After walking through narrow, dark streets, she came to a small hut on the outskirts of the village, covered in ivy and with the door slightly ajar. Upon entering, the hut was filled with strange objects and herbs hanging from the ceiling. The old woman, known as Mayor, was sitting by the fireplace, reading some runes. Isabel explained her encounter with the Barghest and her fear for the life of her Aunt Agatha. Mayor, after listening to her attentively, sighed. The Barghest is not just a legend, child. It is an ancient spirit that has roamed these lands long before the first homes were built. She began. Mayor took an amulet from an old wooden trunk. It was made of silver, with an engraving of a wolf howling at the moon. This amulet has the power to protect you from the Barghest, but only if you are willing to make a pact with him, she warned. Isabel, determined to save her aunt, agreed without hesitation. Mayor then taught her a ritual that involved lighting 3 black candles in the shape of a triangle and reciting an ancient incantation at the exact moment of midnight. The Barghest will come to you, and then you can bargain with him. But be careful, his deals always come at a price, Mayor murmured. Thanking the old woman, Isabel steeled herself and prepared for that night's encounter, hoping to save her aunt and perhaps herself as well. Following the old woman's instructions, she walked to the exact spot where she was to meet the Barghest. With amulet in hand, he began to recite an ancient chant. The wind began to whistle louder and a distant howl echoed in the air. Out of nowhere, a dark, massive figure emerged, its red eyes glowing brightly in the darkness. The Barghest, in all its terrifying glory, stood before her. In a trembling voice, Isabel spoke to him. I have come to beg you to leave my Aunt Agatha alone. I offer you this amulet and my service in exchange for her safety. The Barghest stared at her, studying her. His voice was deep, a mix between a growl and a whisper that said, Why should I accept your offer? What do you have that might interest me? Isabel, remembering the old woman's words, replied, I have will and courage. I can be your eyes and ears in the human world, carry out tasks that you cannot. The Barghest seemed to consider the proposal. A year and a day, he grunted finally. That is what I ask of you. You will serve my purposes during that time. If you fail in any task or attempt to betray me, I will come for you and your aunt. Isabel replied, I accept your bargain. And with those words, a dark pact was sealed under the full moon. The Barghest, before disappearing, looked at her once more and said, You are playing with forces you do not understand, young Isabel. I hope you are prepared for the consequences. Isabel's life had taken an unexpected turn. From caretaker of her elderly aunt, she became the right hand of Whitby's most feared supernatural entity. Each night, while the town slept, she roamed the deserted streets, carrying out the Barghest's commands. Her first task was to collect herbs and charms from ancient graveyards, places where the line between the world of the living and the dead was blurred. Though she feared the shadows, she soon discovered that the Barghest protected her, and nothing dared to come near her. In time, Isabel began to see beyond the Barghest's terrifying appearance. Through her tasks, she understood that the beast was not evil, but rather an entity trapped in a role it had not chosen. During his nightly walks, the Barghest told him stories of ancient times, of how he had been a noble wolf protector of the forests who, by a tragic fate, was transformed into a spirit of death. The Barghest revealed that, over the centuries, he had tried to free himself from his curse, but each attempt had been in vain. Though his appearance was fearsome and his role in the lives of the villagers terrifying, within him he carried a heavy burden of sadness and loneliness. Isabel, pitying him, began to search for a way to help the Barghest find redemption. During her quests, she discovered forgotten rituals, spells, and incantations that might have the power to free the spirit of the Barghest from its eternal condemnation. Meanwhile, the relationship between Isabel and the entity grew stronger. The Barghest, though initially distant, began to trust Isabel, sharing with her secrets of the supernatural world and granting her abilities to see and understand phenomena that were previously beyond her comprehension. Together they faced challenges, from mischievous spirits seeking to wreak havoc in the village to evil entities that saw the Barghest as a rival. But with each trial overcome, The bond between Isabel and the Barghest grew stronger. By the end of her year of service, Isabel had changed. She was no longer just a young woman who had returned to Whitby to care for her aunt. She was now a woman versed in the mysteries of the supernatural world, determined to free her friend, the Barghest, from his curse. Isabel, on her last mission entrusted by the Barghest, had a revealing discovery when she found an ancient rune stone that alluded to rituals of liberation. Driven by compassion and a desire to free the creature from its curse, she investigated thoroughly and discovered a ritual capable of bringing peace to the Barghest. The procedure was complex and required esoteric objects, but Isabel, with determination, managed to obtain them. On the night set aside for the ritual, high on the cliffs of Whitby, Isabel began the ritual. With the Barghest in front of her, the ancient words echoed, the wind howled and the rune stone emitted a mystical glow. At its conclusion, the terrifying spectral figure of the Barghest transformed into a majestic black wolf, whose eyes no longer radiated fury, but gratitude. The wolf, with a nod of his head, acknowledged Isabel's sacrifice and effort before he entered the moors, finally free of the eternal chain that had condemned him to be a messenger of death. Isabel, excited and exhausted, returned to Whitby. The howling and sightings of the Barghest ceased. However, on bright moonlit nights, some swear to see a wolf run freely across the moors, evoking the legend of the Barghest and Isabel's courage.